Hi guys, this is Andrew with rockclass101.com and welcome to live lesson episode number. So I wanted to let you guys know that every second Monday of the month at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be live streaming a lesson over at rockclass101.com. Now these live lessons are going to be hosted by Matt Dahlberg, and each month the topic will be different. So what's fun about the live lessons is that you're not only able to watch live, but you're also able to chat live. So you'll be able to chat with Matt and other Rock Class 101 members. So for more information on how to tune in, click this link right here or go to the site rockclass101.com and do a search for live lessons. Now on that page, you'll also be able to watch every live lesson that we've done before. So if you've ever missed one, no worries, they're all there. Now, if you can't make the live stream, don't sweat it, because the day after the broadcast, we'll be publishing it to our YouTube channel. And to go one step further, on the first Monday of the month, which is 1 week before the broadcast, we're going to have a forum post up on the site, which will cover two things. Number one, what the topic for the month's live lesson will be about. And number two, you'll be able to post your questions ahead of time. So that's great news because you're still going to be able to participate. Now to post on our forum, all you have to do is sign up for basic membership, which is 100% free, and that will gain you the ability to post on our forums. All right, guys, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Matt to teach this month's lesson, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
And we are live. Just going to make sure everything is up and running. These live sessions are always fun in that way with how many screens there always are involved. But I'm going to be checking your guys' chat on YouTube here, make sure that that's all working. Everything looks good. If you're here, feel free to say hi in the chat just to, so that I know that you're here. But today we're going to be talking about bar chords, which honestly is one of the most stressful things I think there is to talk about when learning the ukulele because it's so difficult. And so let's go ahead and just start with the basics of what is a bar chord, right? A bar chord is essentially where you're going to be using a finger to cover more than one string, is all that it really means. And the most common bar chord that we see early on with playing is a B flat chord. So I made this handout PDF that Drew posted over on the forum. And we're going to start by looking at the first chord listed there, which is a B flat. Now, the way that we play a B flat chord is we need the 3 on the G string. We're going to use our ring finger there. We need the 2 on the C string. We're going to use our middle finger here. And then we need the 1 on both the E and the A string. So the most common way that people usually start doing this is by taking their index finger and barring all the way across all 4 strings. But the reality is that we don't need these 2 to be fretted. We only need this index finger to actually be fretting over the 1 on the E and the A strings. So a lot of times it's actually easier to just use that index finger on these 2 strings. But it can also be much harder at first because the flexibility required to get your fingers in this angle is quite difficult. A lot of people end up playing the B flat like this for a long time, not because it gets a better tone, but because it's just a little bit easier from a flexibility standpoint of the finger. So what you want to be working on whenever you're working on bars is just gaining more flexibility. And to talk a little bit about this, you know, flexibility is this thing that occurs with any aspect of us, right? My favorite analogy is touching your toes. So I cannot touch my toes. And is the reason I can't touch my toes because I'm physically unable to ever do it? Or is it because I've got the hamstrings of a 90-year-old man? Well, it's definitely the latter, right? Now, no matter how much I try to touch my toes today, I'm not going to be able to do it without actually hurting myself. But if I started stretching today, and I did some tomorrow and some the next day, a little bit at a time, never pushing myself to the point where it hurts, but rather just continuing to gain flexibility, in a few weeks to maybe a few months, I'll be able to touch my toes. Now, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to use this analogy anymore, so I think I need to remain inflexible, but it's really just the same sort of thing with yoga or whatever else. If you find it really difficult to do a lot of these bars, it's usually just because you lack the flexibility and strength in the fingers because you haven't done it before, and that's okay. I'm going to be talking about a ton of cool little tips and tricks to help make bars easier, but ultimately, at the end of the day, Bars require practice and flexibility, and the only way to get that flexibility is with the practice. So it's there's no secret sauce that you can just apply to it that automatically fixes it. So cool. Let's go and look at this B flat chord though, and let's look at the exact way that I like to play it. So my ring finger is going to be here on the 3rd fret of the G string, my middle finger here on the 2nd fret of the C, and you'll notice both of these fingers are going to be going right up against the fret wire and are being very perpendicular to the strings. Notice how they're not coming down like this, but I'm trying to get a nice arc. That first knuckle joint right there, both of them are going to have a nice bend in. It takes a little bit of practice just to get the fingers to cooperate with this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my index finger come down and press along the 1st fret on the E and the A strings, getting right up next to the fret wire there. Now the trick is trying to keep your hand as straight up and down as you can. A lot of times people will start doing this and their fingers do weird things. Your fingers might go like this and you get a bad sound on the A string, or your fingers might do this and you can't quite get the E. The trick is to try to continue to stretch your fingers to be a little bit more straight up and down, very gradual processes. The first time I played a B flat, it did not look like this. It took quite a bit of practice to get my fingers to cooperate to get that sound. But once you're able to get these fingers up top with that angle and then this finger coming down, you might still find that you sound something like this, where you get these muted sounds. My favorite trick is to look at the thumb position and then look at how you can add torque to what you're playing. So what this means is our thumb in the back, typically with bars, wants to be more squared back on the neck. And one of the questions I had is it normal to feel pain in the thumb? And it is normal within reason, meaning it's normal for it to be a little sore, but if you're having a very sharp pain, you're definitely pushing too hard on it and using it too much. You want the thumb to be back, and you want that knuckle right there to be recessed so that it looks like you're giving a thumbs up. But you don't want to just be pushing with the thumb nonstop. The thing that you really want to try to do is twist your hand a little bit backwards, just a tad. You'll see that what I'm essentially doing is pulling back towards the strings. The difficulty there is making sure that these two fingers still have a very crisp angle, but then as you pull back a little bit, it allows you to emit a little bit more force on these strings and this index finger here more on the E string, while then the A string, instead of trying to push harder, by pulling back just a little bit, you sort of pinch on the string, which means that you essentially put less force onto the string pushing, and you have a little bit more from a almost pulling type of motion. And this applies for pretty much all bars, is when you're able to get the fingers in the right place, when you have that flexibility that started to be acquired, you then start pulling back a little bit to get that next sound, right? So there we go. Just making sure it looks like we are live and everything. Cool. So with a B flat chord, it's okay to use your index finger all the way across all 4 strings, and the concept's the same. You still want to be applying these to be very perpendicular, this finger over straight, and then if you're still struggling to get a good tone, pull back just a little bit on the hand. And you'll find that that's a trick that can really help with bars. Now, this class is going to go into quite a bit of detail on other types of bars using the other fingers especially. And so if we look ahead to measure 2 of the PDF, you'll see a D minor chord listed. But the way that we're going to fret this D minor is not how we typically play D minor. So we typically play D minor like this, right, with 3 fingers. And that's fine. But it's not the way I play it anymore. And it's kind of funny. I actually saw this video of Jake Shimabukuro teaching yesterday on a DVD from like 2005 or something, right? A long time ago. And he said, you use a D minor chord, and he played it like this. And I saw him do that, and I was like, what? A D minor with 2 fingers? How does that work? And he didn't really talk about how to do it, but I was just fascinated with what it was and how to do it. Because when you think about it, using 2 fingers is definitely better than using 3, but man, this chord's hard. So let's break it down. What happens with this style of D minor is we're going to use our middle finger to fret on the G and the C strings, but then come off for the E and the A, which is very similar to how we play like an E chord with any finger, right? The finger is coming off the strings. Then we're going to place our index finger here on the 1st fret of the E, and we're going to have the open A. So a lot of times when people try this chord, it sounds like this. They'll get buzzing up top, and then they'll get nothing down the bottom because the finger isn't, fretting it quite correctly. So to do a little bit deeper of a dive, what you want to look for is you want to try to have your finger actually come up a little bit. So sometimes people try to keep their finger all contained within the fretboard. It's actually okay for this finger to come up so that this knuckle joint right here, where you can see where my finger bends, that's where my finger will bend backwards if it does at all, which human fingers are not meant to bend backwards, but it will bend a little bit there. So if I place my C string right in that divot right here, it can allow me to then bend off of it and get that E and that A string to just be open. So when you look at this, you can actually see the E and the A string are completely out so that they can continue to ring. So if I play this, and then I add my index now, my index is going to come over with that nice angle. You see how that first knuckle is bent, just like with the B flat chord, to get this sound. Now, this is one of the harder chords, I think, to play on the ukulele in this way, a D minor. But once you get it, it opens up so many doors for how you can play D minor, because now your pinky and ring fingers are free to do a lot of different cool stuff. So I can't recommend that D minor enough. And again, with all of this, it takes that flexibility. The first time you go to a yoga class, you don't expect to be able to do all of the different poses. Same deal here. If this is the first time you've tried playing some of these chords, give yourself a couple weeks of practice, gaining more flexibility a little bit at a time, and have faith that you're going to be able to do it, even though it might feel totally impossible right now. This chord, the first time I tried it, felt absolutely impossible for me, and now it's one of my favorite chords and one of the easier ones for me to play, just because of all the practice that I gave to this chord. Now, if you look at the sheet, the next one that's listed there is a D minor 7, which is just playing this and then adding the ring finger here on the 3rd fret of the A string. Your fingers kind of look like a rocket ship with this chord. This one is a really great showcase for these bar techniques, especially barring with a different finger, because the middle finger now is going to need to bend back like this, right? You see that bend right there, leaving the E and the A off. Index finger comes onto the E string, and then ring finger is going to come up in front to the A string. And you want to make sure that ring finger isn't like this, right? We only want this sort of bend when we're barring with the finger. We want it to be this type of bend whenever that finger is not engaged in a bar. And this takes some practice. I mean, that's kind of a theme today, right? But it's much easier to play a D minor chord, D minor 7 like this, than it is like this after the practice. And what's cool about doing it this way is you can eventually start getting really comfortable with adding other fingers. Sometimes when you do things like add fingers, you'll notice you'll have some movement in these areas, and that's okay. It's really making sure you're pushing down and getting a good tone over the strings. Now, if you're still struggling with the B flat chord, this D minor might seem very much impossible, but a lot of the concepts are exactly the same. If you're not getting a great tone with your bar, what you want to look for is, are you pushing down on that string in a way that will give you a good tone? You want to make sure you're getting right up next to the fret wire with whatever chord you're playing. The further back you are, the worse it's going to sound. So get right up in there to get a really good tone. There we go. Oh, sorry. Just some chat stuff's just coming through, so I'm going to start talking about. So with that D minor like this, again, keeping these just like so will really help. And get right up next to the fret wire will make it a little bit easier. And then with your hand position and your thumb, be pretty flexible with how the thumb is approached. So with the thumb, sometimes it'll be more at a perpendicular angle to the fretboard. Sometimes it'll be more of a parallel angle. Sometimes it'll be more in between, more of a 45-degree like I do typically with this D minor chord. So RB Ukulele Vid says, I can do the D minor chord if I spend about 30 seconds positioning my left hand fingers with my right hand. Probably not practical. And I'm really glad you said that, because that means you have the capabilities to do it. It just takes some practice. And 30 seconds turns to 28 seconds, which turns to 25 seconds. And eventually it turns into you just place your fingers on there, and that's totally fine, right? So it's really critical as you're practicing this to keep that in mind, that it will take time, and that's okay. And so Connie, I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, says, but like anything else, takes muscle memory and practice to be able to go to it without spending so much time positioning your fingers. Yep, that's exactly it. It's difficult. These chords, to be frank, our hands are not made to play ukuleles, right? Nobody's is. If they were, they'd be more similar lengths. It's a whole thing, right? So, but that's great that this that you're getting that D minor. So D minor 7 like this, another way that I love playing it because it allows you to free up the pinky for some other stuff. So continuing on, this next one, this C minor 7 chord, is, I think, the hardest chord to play on a ukulele consistently and well, which is why I put it here. This is a nightmare chord. Some people just get it, and I don't like those people because it took me so long to get. And this is where we introduce sort of double bars into our play, where we still have partial bars with some fingers and a lot of responsibilities, basically. So the way that we play this is we're going to take our middle finger and we're going to bar it over the 6th fret of the E and the A strings in basically the same way we did with the D minor on the G and the C, only now we're going down to the E and the A. And because we're going down here, we don't want our finger way up. We want it to just be on that E and that A to try and get a good sound. And we want to get as much of a bend in this knuckle as we can. Now, as a quick showcasing here, this hand's been fretting ukulele for years. This hand hasn't. This finger goes nice and far back on this hand. This finger, ow, it hurts to go even that far, right? This hand, no problem. This hand, ow, right? That's just flexibility from practice. I wasn't born that way, right? The hands get more flexible. So when you're practicing this chord, the first thing to practice is just getting that bend in that middle finger and trying to get it to be as steep as possible, because what happens is we're then going to take our ring finger and place it on the 7th fret of the C string, again, making sure that this one, because it's only fretting the single string, is going to have that nice curvature in the knuckle going this way, right? And the middle finger is going the opposite way. This is what makes this so hard, is one finger is doing one thing and the other finger is doing something very different. The last step is taking your index finger and actually barring it across the 5th fret. Now, its only responsibility is the G string, right? So it's okay if you apply your force to the finger on the 5G and let the rest of the bar just sort of hang out, because it doesn't need to be good over all 4 strings. It just needs to be on the G, while this one's here on the C, and then this one's here on the E and the A, right? And that's your C minor 7. Again, I think this is the hardest chord on the ukulele. I'm not just saying that. I think that this shape, to get consistently, is the hardest. Now, that being said, once you have it, it's easy. Once that flexibility is there, it's no problem. Imagine a yoga instructor touching their toes, right? No problem if they have the flexibility to do it. Same sort of deal here. So it takes a lot of practice. If you find that you're only getting a couple strings at a time, you want to sort of reinforce. What strings are you getting? Are you getting the E and the A? That means this might be fretted correctly, but the angle might not be enough for you to bring the other fingers over. Feel free to work on it in pieces. So what that means is maybe the first thing I practice is just this, right? And then the next thing I practice is bringing this. And maybe that's 2 weeks of practice, and that's okay. And then the index coming over. It's tough, right? As a real quick, total random aside that's kind of fun, if you're really getting stressed about the C minor 7 because it's difficult to play and you just want to play a C minor 7, just do the 6 on the E and the A and play a 0 on the G and the C. That's also a C minor 7, kind of neat, right? But the reason why we're doing this C minor 7 is we're actually learning a little bit of a turnaround, because the next chord that occurs after this is an F7 played as 5-5-5-6. So what we want to do is look at this and see what needs to change. Well, our index finger now has the responsibility of actually barring across, and our middle finger is going to come down here onto 6 of the A. So the whole point of this exercise is we go from this, which has the partial bar, or the partial bar here with the middle finger, and the index laying across, but really only is responsible for the G, followed by the index now responsible for 3 strings with that middle finger coming down. And then the last chord in this little run is a B flat major 7, which sounds terrifying, and it's a little difficult because what you're going to do is another double bar. And this one's a harder double bar in its purest sense because you need to cover more strings with just bars. You're going to start by taking your ring finger, which we haven't used in a bar yet today, and we're going to bar it across the 5th fret of the C, the E, and the A strings. And then you're going to take your index finger and place it on the 3rd fret of the G string, but really, again, you can do a bar across that to get that, that angle. Now, you notice the bend in the ring finger. You see how I'm having to get some of that flexibility. Well, what happens is when I cross my index finger over here, it's a big tendency to bring the hand forward. If you bring the hand forward, the tone's like this. You get all these buzzes. So what you need to do is make sure you're getting as much of a bend as you can right there, and then pull back with the hand, right? So it's more of a bend in the knuckle here, pull back with the hand. That pinches the string on the A string, right? And this one's really freaking hard too. A little tip is whenever you have a bar and you have a free finger like my middle finger is here, it's okay to actually stack it over one of the fingers that's barring. So you'll notice usually when I'm playing this chord, my index finger is going to have my middle finger over it just to kind of help with the whole process. It makes it a little bit easier to get down. Now these chords that we just played, this one to this, that's one of the hardest progressions I think you'll pretty much ever play on the ukulele from a tonality standpoint and flexibility. It's really tricky. And so work on it for a while before thinking, oh, I can't do this, because it kind of takes everyone a while to develop that flexibility. And it's not a how many hours you practice type of deal either. It's something that's over how much time you've practiced. So if you've been doing this for a while, you'll find that this is much easier to, kind of work into. So now as we go to the next part here, sort of the end of it, it's a D chord, 2-2-2-0, which normally we can play like this, right? But that would not be what the exercise is today. So sometimes people play it with the index finger, right? And the index finger there is, I find that you need to get that bend and slot the E string right into this divot right here where the bend comes off, so that then my A string can ring open, right? That might be a chord that some of you have played before. And it's not as hard as some of the other bars, but you'll see that steep angle that's sort of occurring to get that A string to open up. It's okay to move the hand up or down a little bit depending on your finger shape and size and length. Everyone does this a little bit differently, and that's okay. Now, this is great, but this isn't how we're doing it for this exercise, because what we want to try to do is use our middle finger to do the bar. And it's very difficult to build the flexibility in the middle finger and ring finger. I don't know why, as I go out of focus. It's just harder. The index finger seems to be much more malleable than the middle or ring. But I'm going to take my middle finger here. I'm going to place it over the G, C, and E. And same deal. You'll see that the knuckle, you can see the line in my knuckle right there. I'm going to try to place right about with the E string, so that I can then bend the finger off to get a good tone so that my A string rings out. I'm going to get right up next to the fret wires, and I'm going to pull back with the hand just enough to be able to pinch over the strings that I want to be pinched. And that's that D chord. The reason why we want to use our middle finger here, you might be thinking, why ever not use the index? Is if you look at the tab, the next thing that's going to be played is the index finger to go to 1 on the A. And then you can do the ring finger on 3 of the A and the index back down to 1. So now you'll notice when I'm doing this, my index finger and ring finger are going to try to be more of that angle with the knuckles actually bent this way, right? This one's coming back, this one's going more forward. So very critical just to get comfortable with this. And it is a total hand twister. Like this is way more advanced stuff than people think it is. They think, oh, chords should be easy, but this is the hand gymnastics for sure. So if you look at measure 5 there, when it goes, the whole point then is to end with a G minor. And the G minor, you just move that bar off, place the middle finger here on the 2nd fret of the C string, and that ring finger comes on to 3 of the E and play through, right? So. And that's just another little exercise that you can use to get more comfortable and confident with these bars. They are really difficult, and there's a lot of things that go into play to make good tone with them. Remember that you want to ensure that you're getting right up next to the fret wire. You want to wiggle your finger. What I mean by that is try to find the exact spot that your finger fits in the strings. It looks a little bit different for each person. You want to make sure that you're maximizing the flexibility of it. So if I'm trying to do a bar with a finger find where the strings can come off of it so that you're placing the string right in that little divot. For instance, that D chord, right, where I want the A string to be open, I want to make sure that my E string is played right where my finger is breaking to get that sound, no matter which finger I might be using. It's the same sort of deal. And think of this as sort of like a mouth guard. What I mean by that is if you go to a store and buy like a night guard or a mouth guard for sports, you'll get a general size, right? I have a large mouth, which people tell me all the time that I have a big mouth. And so I'll go to the store and I'll buy the large or XL mouth guard. But if I just take that mouth guard and I put it in my mouth and go play football, I'm going to probably have some messed up teeth afterwards because the mouth guard was not built exactly for me. It was just built for a general size. Everything that I'm showing you here is sort of the general size. A lot of things, go into play for it to become fitted for you. And in the case of a mouth guard, you have to boil it and you have to mold it to your teeth. That's the equivalent to practice. You sitting there and practicing and moving your fingers in little ways is the same way as a mouth guard being formed to your teeth. And because your fingers are going to be different than mine, you're going to play the chords just a little bit differently. And so you always want to look for, why am I getting a bad tone? And the usual reason why is that you're not fretting it correctly. Very rarely are we not pushing hard enough. Usually we're pushing too hard. Another analogy that I really like to make with this is I call it the elevator analogy, which all that means is if you imagine that you're standing in front of an elevator and you click the button and the elevator goes right by you and the button stops being illuminated. It's kind of annoying, right? You missed the elevator despite clicking the button. Do we go over and click the button again, or do we kind of, click it a little harder, maybe twice, or that remote wasn't changing the channel, so we push it harder, or that crosswalk didn't switch, so we hit that button harder? We tend to overcome what we lack in dexterity or in ability with strength. It's just a kind of a human nature. So when you're playing a B flat chord and it sounds like this, we think, I'm not pushing hard enough, and then we push harder, and it doesn't sound any better, right? And the reason is because we're not pushing the right way. And if I'm literally just, with how much I'm pushing right now, if I just move my fingers a little bit, all of a sudden start getting that sound. If I move my fingers a little bit, get those better angles. I'm actually pushing less hard now than I was a moment ago. It's just that little, figuring it out to find that exact spot. Again, the thing I can't stress enough is get right up next to that fret wire and make sure that the finger angles are good. So the bar is going to be more bent back, the other fingers are going to be more bent forward, and the thumb is going to be more behind the fretboard. If you have your thumb up like this and try to do a bar, it's really hard. It's not really worth it. Have the bar more behind. I typically have about a 45-degree angle. Some people are more perpendicular. Some people are more parallel. It just, again, depends, but keeping that thumb behind can really help. The other thing that can greatly help with bars is making sure that you have a little bit of a space here as you're doing them. There's always going to be that sort of little, not quite circle, but space that's created between the thumb and the fingers and the fretboard there. If you're playing it like this, it's really difficult to have any good tone. So have the thumb actually connected with the neck and creating that little bit of an opening. All right. So there are a bunch of questions on the forums that I'm going to start answering, and if you have any questions in chat, feel free to leave them too. I'm seeing some great questions and things already. And so one funny thing, RB Ukulele Vid said, "Oh, thank God I have the flexibility in my middle finger, but there's no way I could do it with my index." So no way yet, right? But it's fascinating, right? Because I could do my index almost right away, and my middle finger took forever for me to get it. And it's just because, again, everyone's different. So everyone's flexibility is different. That's another point I want to make. Sometimes you might have a friend that you start teaching ukulele and you show them a B flat chord and they play it right away. And it's very discouraging because you might have been working on it for months and might even not be able to do it yet. Everyone's different. Everyone has different flexibility with this that sort of naturally occurs. So don't judge yourself based on anyone else. Just look at it from your point of view of how flexible am I in this finger and what do I have to do to get a little bit more comfortable with it. So let me go ahead and pull open the rock class forum posts because, again, there's some really great ones. Hot Milk Tea wrote, "This is exactly why I'm struggling hard when I play the bar chord. My thumb, where touch the neck hurts so much for several weeks, is because my other fingers are too weak. But if I practice to continue the bar chord, my thumb is getting worse and I can't afford to play anymore. Is there any suggestions? So yeah, that was sort of I was mentioning at the beginning of this session, you're pushing too hard with the thumb. And it's not that you're pushing too hard with the other fingers, or, you're pushing way too hard with the thumb. So it would be a good idea to increase the tension a little bit on the other fingers. Try to make it more equal. But another tip is, even without a ukulele sort of involved, is use torque a little bit more. And what I mean by torque is, it's not just compressing like this. Sometimes it's pulling and pinching the strings. If you imagine like the index finger, if I'm trying to get that A string, and I'm just pushing, not quite getting it. But if I bring my hand back a little bit, so notice how the wrist is going to go towards me just a tad, you'll notice that will actually close on the string, and that gives me the connection that I need. So a lot of times it's not just that you're pushing too hard, it's that you're not, your hand isn't quite the right shape. So whenever you're working on a bar chord, keep in mind that soreness and fatigue is okay, but pain is not. So if you're getting an actual pain, you want to make sure you're taking breaks. In the same way that, with something like yoga, you don't want pain, soreness, or tension, discomfort is okay. But pain is something you want to watch out for. So I would recommend trying to use the other fingers a little bit more and trying to twist the hand in different ways to reposition. Robin Boyd said, I have a question about partial bars. I've always struggled to bend my finger to get the partial bar for the B flat shape. It's something I'm able to do a bit better than I used to, but I still struggle, and I find it much easier to bar all the strings with the index finger. Never really had a problem with full bars. Anyway, is this terrible? It's not something that had a huge impact on my playing, so I won't let it worry me too much, but should I be more worried about it? So I definitely would encourage you to work on continuing to try to do the partial bar. As you actually said, you're able to do a bit better than you used to. So just that continued practice, doing it a little bit every day, means in a few months, it's something that you won't have as a problem. One of the problems that we have as people practicing is we start doing something and it feels impossible, and we tend to give it up instead of continue with it a little bit at a time. Think of learning a bar chord as like this is a weird analogy, but I'm rolling with it. Think of learning a bar chord as the same as like if you have to eat a mountain of rice or something, which wouldn't be very healthy. So maybe we'll say kale. You have to eat a mountain of kale. If you try to sit down and eat the whole thing right then, you're not going to make any progress, basically, and you're just going to feel sick at the end of it, unless you really love kale, but then you've got other problems. This is going off the tracks. But if you instead were to say, hey, I don't like kale, I got to eat this mountain of it. Every day, I'm going to take 4 bites. Well, yeah, over the first few days, you won't notice anything. Over the first few weeks, you might start to notice something. But over months, you're really going to notice that impact being made. And flexibility is the same thing. It rewards over time practice. So a lot of these chords took me literal years to learn. It's just because it takes a lot of careful practice with that. The other thing that I want to recommend is, online sessions are always great, but if you have friends that play, or you have music teachers in your area, it never hurts to meet with them just to have them look at your finger positioning and have them tweak it a little bit. Usually just that 4 seconds of them moving your fingers can help unlock something. So S Tiny Uke or Steiny Uke says, I usually have difficulties when I do a pull off to a bar chord. For example, I have a bar chord on the 2nd fret and do a pull off on the 2nd string from fret 3 to 2. The string usually sounds like it's muted. What can I practice to make it sound cleaner? So that's a great question. You want to make sure that before you do the pull off, you can have a good tone. So what happens too often is when we have something like this and we do the pull off, it's a dead sound because we're not actually fretting completely with the bar beforehand. So get right up next to that fret wire and have the force over all 4 so that you know you're getting a good sound. And when you add the 3, don't let up at all on the 2, right? It's very easy for our finger to kind of change. So now I'm not quite getting as good of a tone because I let up when the 3 came on. Keep it on knowing that you're going to that 2. And so right up against the fret wire is a big tip for that too. Then Lisa DMH said, I've got a question. I struggle with the partial bar on the B flat B flat shape anywhere. My fingers bend all wrong. Any exercises help with the index finger go straight, and then send a picture. And her fingers look about like this as she's doing it, where her finger really goes steeply. So yeah, it's a fantastic question. The trick there is to get that finger to be straight and just work on this. Don't worry about the next finger. Just try to get this. And it might take a couple months to get really, really comfortable with that. That's normal. Again, it took me quite a while to get comfortable with these chords, but we're trying to build that flexibility with the index to be more straight up and down. It's okay if the finger comes out a little bit, as long as the actual pad of the finger and the finger itself is straight. So there's not much of a difference between that and that from my actual finger's perspective. So just gradually building up that familiarity and reinforcing that positive muscle memory. If you start doing it and then you stop for a few weeks and then you go back to it, you might find that you've recessed to where you were before. So, and then I think that was all the questions on the rock class thing. So I'm going to check out YouTube now. If you guys are watching and have any questions, feel free to leave them down below. Bar chords, it's funny because I knew I wanted to do a live lesson on this, but I was dreading it because bar chords, so many things in the ukulele playing you can give a quick tip for, and it kind of unlocks something. And bar chords have lots of quick tips, but they really just take a lot of practice and a lot of gaining flexibility in somewhere that lacks flexibility. You know, we don't use our hands a lot in this way. We're not used to our fingers bending backwards and doing all these weird shapes. So it's like stretching anything else in the body. It's just trying to get that continued repetitious motion to be, get comfortable. So, all right. So let me go ahead and look here. So it looks like Zill said, do you need all different spots when you change uke size? So kind of, not entirely. If you're really familiar and comfortable with a bar, you can accommodate it pretty quickly. But it is different on a soprano than a tenor. Your fingers spacing will be a little smaller, a little bit bigger, and that's okay. I would recommend practicing it on one uke at first, just to start getting flexible. But then I actually recommend, as you're trying to get really good at it, to play it on a bunch of ukes, because then it allows you to gain that familiarity. Or rather be able to adjust your familiarity quickly, where on this uke it feels like this, and on this uke it feels like this. And if it takes you less time to make that little accommodation from one size to the next, it just makes you a better player, because you're able to adapt more to situations. And when you're introduced to a new chord you've never played, you typically can learn it more fluidly and easily, because you have that experience of going between different sizes. So it does change it a little bit, but it is a good thing to do. So Robin says, hearing that they take a lot of practice is actually reassuring. Yeah, it's a lot of times people think I'm doing something terribly wrong. And this is a quick aside, how many of us have that feeling of, oh, it's not coming right away. I'm doing all the things that they said. I better stop to make sure I do it the right way. And then we never practice it because we're too worried that we're going to do it the wrong way that we don't even try it in the first place. Bar chords are so important to just try. Even if you're doing something a little wrong, as you work on it, those things will work themselves out. It takes some people longer because they might be putting their finger a little bit the wrong way, but it's better to put it a little bit the wrong way than no way at all. It's so important to have that failure before you get to the correct sound. There's a fantastic quote, which is, failure the best teacher is, which Yoda said, as well as many others, I'm sure. And it's very true for bar chords. You don't know what doesn't work until you've done it, right? And so that's so critical. When I was learning how to solo in college, so I took a bunch of music courses and brought my ukulele to them. One of the courses I took was Jazz Workshop. And the whole point of it was to teach jazz music, and one of the major elements was how to solo over changes. And so I was just obsessed with music theory and everything else, but soloing was something I was never very good at. So I'd go in the class, and then they'd say, oh, for this part, you're going to use the C Dorian scale. And I'd be like, okay. And I go home and I play the C Dorian scale, and it didn't sound good enough. So I immediately stopped and thought to myself, well, I'm missing something. It's not working. So I don't know enough information. And then the next time I'd go back and I'd be like, oh, the C Dorian, that didn't work. And they'd say, oh, okay, you got to focus on the chord tones. And so I'd go back and I'd start practicing. I'd try playing the chord tones once or twice. Didn't sound great. So I thought, nope, don't know enough. And this process repeated. week after week after week where I wasn't making any progress at all on my soloing because I kept making a sound that I didn't think was good enough. And so I didn't want to reinforce that, and I got nowhere because I was unable to just sit and try and fail. And when I finally kind of realized that I needed to just, put my axe to the stone, so to speak, and work on it, I started making progress. It wasn't fast. It was very slow, but it was steady and consistent over time. And my soloing improved a lot because I sort of tried and failed and tried again. And bar chords are no different. It's really important to try and gain this flexibility over time. And eventually you'll get it. So cool. Well, Zil says, failure, I'm great at that. I am a master failure, which is why I think I like teaching so much, because I've failed so many times, I can help other people fail less. Failure is great. The reason I love teaching so much is because it's all about oops, right? I love the word oops. It's a magical word. And it's all about fixing oopses. So it's okay to struggle with bar chords. It's okay for them to be difficult. Everyone's fingers are different for how they're going to react to it. One last thing I'll say is I had a student who started taking lessons with me, and I think he was pushing 80, and he had very large hands that were very thick fingers. And I don't think he was arthritic, but his hands were not the most mobile. And he said, "Hey, I want to learn Bach." And he'd never played an instrument before. And I was like, all right, let's do this. And he was so patient, and his work ethic was so good. Some weeks he would literally just practice fretting 2 notes at a time. And now, 5 years later, he's playing through John King's Bach, book, and playing Jesus, Joy of Man's Desire, and all these really impressive tunes, just because he stuck with it and gained that flexibility one piece at a time. So, but cool. Well, I don't see any other questions in YouTube, so I think I'm going to run upstairs and hang out with my wife and kid. I was at the Mighty Uke Day Ukulele Festival over this last weekend, which was a ton of fun, and teaching some workshops and things and talking about rock class and all of that. So that was an absolute blast. Can't even talk now. And so next, I'll see you guys next month for our next episode of these live sessions. And as always, if you have any questions with these bars or anything else, or something that you didn't feel I covered enough or anything like that, feel free to post in the forum. I try to check it when I can and try to get back to you guys. And I might even be able to talk about it in next month's episode. So thank you guys so much for coming out, and I will talk to you soon.